So you guys may be asking yourself, why am I saying that there's a big divide between the haves and have-nots in the furry community? And why in the world does it even matter? I would say this matters since it has a lot to do with accessibility. And since the community advertises itself as being inclusive, it ought to be consistent with that, right? And I think the thing that really causes this divide is the fact that many of the things in the community revolve around the consumption of goods and services. So how much you're able to participate in the community can oftentimes depend on how much you can afford. You can argue that pretty much any community does this to some extent, but I would argue that the furry fandom is one of those places where you generally have to spend more. So people with less disposable income may have a harder time participating in the community, right? When compared to other communities that are similar. I'm not saying that if you don't have disposable income, you can't participate in the community at all. I'm just saying that the average person with less disposable income will have a harder time participating in the community in comparison to someone who has a lot of it, right? I don't know, I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. Anyways, I guess I'll try to make my ideas here easier to understand by explaining how fandoms in general can have these situations where we have haves and have-nots and funnel down to the furry community where we have specific problems that are similar. So if you guys feel that I'm getting off topic, just try to be patient. I'll get there eventually. Fandoms in general have their haves and have-nots due to some kind of barrier to entry. Some of these barriers may be high, some of these barriers may be lower. And I guess a simple analogy to make this easier to understand is by comparing games. When a game has pay-to-win mechanics, generally how competitive a person is will oftentimes shadow how much the person spends on it. Like, I think you and I can both agree that paying money to have more health or do more damage in a game will give the person who spends a leg up over the person that doesn't, right? I'm not saying that skill and dedication in a game doesn't matter at all. I'm just saying that the average person that spends on a pay-to-win game will be more competitive than the average person that doesn't. And you don't even have to look at it through the lens of competition, right? You can also look at it through the lens of being able to play with your friends. For example, in games like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, you generally have to pay for expansions and buy a subscription, right? And if your friends are able to buy these expansions and you weren't able to do the same thing for whatever reason it may be, you're going to have a harder time maintaining those friendships and making new friends. This may be a silly analogy and maybe wondering what it has to do with larger fandoms in general, but this thing where there are financial barriers or fast tracks that differ between communities to communities can also be seen in a lot of these subcultures or fandoms. And I guess for the sake of this argument, I'll give you the example of live action roleplay or LARP, which I feel I'm very familiar with, so I can talk on it. Anyways, I noticed that there were certain activities that depended on someone's discretionary income in my time in live action roleplay. Since some of these activities oftentimes required people to go to events that are far away, which in itself can be prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, or when they were in your local area, would be these sort of meetups after events. Technically they were optional, but to be honest, you don't want to end up as a fifth wheel just because you weren't in the 50 other meetups where you hung out unofficially. And one thing that I have noticed over a long period of time is that you realize that the more shared experiences you have with other people, the closer you generally tend to be with them, right? And it really sucks if a lot of people are left out of that just because of their lack of discretionary income. And this is very much the case with the example I mentioned earlier of events that are held non-locally. For live action roleplay, I used to belong to a group called Amped Guard, right? They had locations across the country, and non-local events would be held in tiers with duchy level events or kingdom level events or empire level events, right? And generally speaking, the higher level the event was, the further it was from you and the more expensive it would have been to attend. I would say most people attended the kingdom and duchy level events, and those were the events that everyone should have gone to, right? If they wanted to really have those shared experiences so they would be closer to the people at their local park. And again, it sucks if some people aren't able to go to these events just because of discretionary income. Anyways, what I'm trying to really hammer in with this LARP example is that a lot of these barriers to entry can make things exclusive in a sense. Kind of like the analogy I gave with the subscription model in World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. So yeah, I guess we can move on to the final bit, where we look at the furry community in a similar lens. And finally, I'll talk about how the furry community has a lot of similar financial barriers to entry as the live action roleplay community. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, I'm saying that there are a lot of similarities through that lens. I would say the furry community is very consumption oriented, meaning a lot of the activities that revolve around the community revolve around some kind of consumption, right? There are costs that are associated with going to a con. There are costs associated with participating in the VR chat community, let's be honest, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that you can't participate in the community at all if you don't spend much. I'm just saying that your options are limited by not having that discretionary income. And to give a few examples, I'll be looking at these costs in online and offline spheres. And I guess the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to offline barriers to entry would be the costs associated with furry conventions, right? Since going to one of these conventions doesn't just involve you buying a ticket. You're not just spending $50 to $70 on a basic ticket. I guess one thing to consider is that they're usually located in major cities, so obviously prices would be higher. Overall, for example, every con I've been in, whether they were near me or far away from me, costed at least a couple $100s. And you have to consider that I cut corners in these situations. To sort of highlight this point, this was a situation where we had 3 people to a bed, and we really shaved down how long we were going to stay in the room, right? Just to name a few things. And spending at least a couple $100s can be a lot of money for a lot of people. And First Science suggests that this is a normal price, with the average amount spent being around $1,000 in a year, and the median being around $540. I would say that it's enough that it would be something that would be prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. And this is not to say that cons are horrible places to be. I really enjoy going to them, and meeting people online doesn't even hold a candle to how much richer an IRL interaction is, right? I'm just saying that it sucks that a lot of people aren't able to go to cons and derive the benefits associated with going to one. Anyways, I guess elaborating with this whole con situation, I guess some other things to consider is that to avoid being the fifth wheel, it really does help to go to cons multiple times consistently, right? And by this, I mean, something I've really noticed was that the more times you do go to a con, the easier it tends to be to make friends, since it's not like the friends that you made in your previous con went anywhere. Old friends really help you find new contact, right? They may inform or invite you to room parties, and that may be very helpful. And it's kind of unavoidable to talk about the advantages of fursuits in room parties, right? Since they open doors. And, I suppose I can confirm this, since I did compare having one and not having one in a con, and I'd say it was easier to get into these social events, whether they be room parties or any other quote-unquote invitation-only events, to be completely honest. So yeah, I'd say it opens doors. No pun intended, but I'll go into a little more nuance, since this advantage usually depends on the type of fursuit, right? I was talking to someone quite recently, and he mentioned that this advantage usually depends on whether the suit is quote-unquote cute or attractive, which makes a lot of sense, so I suppose that's my new position. Since I would say that pretty much anyone can buy or make a suit that looks scary, like something out of Five Nights at Freddy's, for a few $100s, right? But I don't think that gives you the same outcome as what you would think of when you think fursuit. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. But I don't know, as far as online barriers to entry is concerned, I think I already talked about a lot of this in my Eurocentrism video. Making presentable content can have a barrier to entry as well. Obviously, there's the element of disposable time, right? Sorry, I'm very tired. But yeah, I hope I at least made a bit of sense. But anyways, the basic idea that I'm trying to get across here is that the furry community can sometimes be an expensive hobby, so people that don't have much discretionary income will have a hard time, participating. Anyways, I guess that's enough of me that you get to listen to. So yeah, I'll see you guys soon. I have a bunch of good ideas in the works. And yeah, it's gonna be so much fun. I'm gonna talk about so many different things.